What happened to Robin Williams' three kids? The children born to a man who lived 1,000 lives on screen, yet carried his deepest truths off stage in the quiet corners of family. To the world, Robin was the master of voices, the comedian who never ran out of momentum, the actor who could summon laughter and heartbreak within the same breath. But to Zach, Zelda, and Cody, he was simply Dad, a man whose love was boundless, whose energy was relentless, and whose absence has never truly stopped echoing since 2014. Each child came into his life at a different moment, a different version of Robin, and what they inherited wasn't just a legacy of fame, but a complex, beautiful mess of joy, pressure, and grief. The story begins in 1983 when Robin and his first wife, Valerie Velarde, welcomed their first son, Zachary Pym Williams. It was the same year Robin's career skyrocketed past sitcom fame and into the unpredictable terrain of Hollywood stardom Mork and Mindy had just wrapped, and his first major film roles were on the horizon. Zach's earliest years were spent in the shifting glow of a rising icon. But inside the Williams household, things were simpler. There were walks, toy shops, gardens. Robin, still early in fatherhood and fame, poured his affection into his son like he was making up for time he hadn't yet lost, but stardom doesn't leave much room for stillness. By the late 1980s, Robin was a household name, and his marriage to Valerie began to fracture under the weight of that public life. Zach was 5 when his parents split, and while he remained close with both, the split marked the beginning of a complicated emotional landscape. Robin married again, this time to Marcia Garces, his son's former nanny, and the family dynamic expanded, reorganized, and at times strained. Still, Zach had what most children crave: a father who adored him. Robin didn't always have the balance right, but he showed up with enthusiasm, with humor, with that unshakable emotional intensity that made him beloved around the world. But for Zach, growing up with a father so beloved by strangers could feel oddly isolating. He wasn't just Robin's son, he was Robin Williams' son, and that came with invisible weight. As Zach moved into adolescence, Robin's career entered a golden stretch. Dead Poets Society, Aladdin, Mrs. Doubtfire, Good Will Hunting. He played fathers, mentors, caretakers, healers. On screen, he became everyone's dream dad. Off screen, he was navigating real parenting in a world where millions felt they already knew him. Zach attended private schools, lived among creative chaos, and watched as his father's face became global shorthand for joy. But joy in the Williams house wasn't always predictable. Robin battled addiction more than once. His mood shifted, his mind ran faster than most could follow. For Zach, the challenge was learning how to stay grounded in a life where the person at the center could light up a room or vanish into exhaustion sometimes within the same hour. After high school, Zach charted a path that looked very little like his father's. He studied business, not film. He took jobs in finance, not entertainment. It wasn't rejection, it was self-preservation. He understood that stepping into the same spotlight would only magnify the comparisons, and he had no interest in being measured against brilliance. Still, he didn't distance himself emotionally. Even as he built a life in the nonprofit and corporate world, he remained close to Robin. They spent time together. They talked, and when Robin's mental health began to slip in the early 2010s, it was Zach who sensed the depth of what was unraveling. Robin had been misdiagnosed with Parkinson's, when in truth he was suffering from a rare and brutal neurological disorder. Lewy body dementia. The symptoms crept in slowly: confusion, paranoia, emotional flatlines, and by the time they became undeniable, it was too late for repair. When Robin died by suicide in August 2014, Zach was 31 years old. The loss didn't just shake him, it shattered him. He spiraled inward. He struggled with anxiety, with depression, with alcohol. For months he withdrew, trying to carry a grief that was too heavy and too public. Everyone mourned Robin, but few could understand what it meant to lose a father to both disease and despair. In the years that followed, Zach rebuilt. He sought therapy, joined recovery groups, and began to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about honoring. He launched a mental health company called PYM, prepare your mind, and began working with national advocacy organizations to push for mental health support across communities. His grief became his mission. In his public statements, Zach never tried to simplify the story. He spoke plainly about trauma, about inherited pain, about what it meant to parent yourself when your parent couldn't anymore. And in 2020, he started a new chapter of his own, marrying Olivia June, a woman who had supported him through some of his darkest hours. They had met during a time when Zach didn't believe he was worthy of love, but Olivia stood beside him anyway. That same year, they welcomed a son, McLaurin Clement Williams. Named after Robin's middle name, McLaurin Mickey became a living bridge between generations. Zach didn't try to recreate his father's energy. He didn't try to perform legacy. He just held his son with clarity, presence, and gratitude. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Zola June, and Zach's role as a father deepened again. He called it the most transformative experience of his life, not because it fixed anything, but because it gave everything meaning. He raised his children with gentleness, routine, and an openness about emotion that had taken him decades to find. While Robin had raised his voice to make the world laugh, Zach raised his to make the world quieter, safer, for people who feel too much and speak too little. And every year, on his father's birthday or the anniversary of his death, Zach would post a tribute. Not always long, not always loud, but always loving. A photograph, a memory, a reminder. The world had lost Robin Williams, the entertainer, but Zach had lost Dad. And in healing himself, he had built a new way for that name to live on through children, through advocacy, and through the kind of stillness his father had never quite reached. As the oldest child, Zach bore witness to the earliest heights and the deepest valleys, but he also became the foundation, the one who turned grief into action and memory into purpose. His story is just the first thread in a family shaped by brilliance and bound by love. The next would come 6 years later, when Robin welcomed a daughter named Zelda, and with her, the story would take a new turn, one filled with art, rebellion, and the quiet determination to walk her own path through the spotlight. If Zach carried the weight of being first the oldest, the one who witnessed Robin's rise and reckoning, then Zelda Ray Williams entered the story during the actor's golden era, a time when his career was as expansive as his energy. She was born on July 31st, 1989, just months after Robin married Marcia Garces, his former assistant turned second wife. The timing couldn't have been more emblematic. That same year, Dead Poets Society cemented Robin's status not just as a comic genius, but a dramatic powerhouse. Awards, acclaim, and global recognition followed. And in the middle of it all, a daughter named after the iconic video game character. Zelda's birth signaled both Robin's childlike spirit and his deep desire to build something personal amid the whirlwind. Unlike Zach, who lived his early childhood in the periphery of Robin's growing fame, Zelda was raised in the very heart of it, a house where the phone never stopped ringing, where the man in the kitchen might be filming in Paris tomorrow and voicing a genie in Burbank the next. But in that house, something sacred formed. Robin adored his daughter. He saw her not just as a child, but as a kindred spirit, sharp, imaginative, and emotionally attuned. She became the quiet observer in a home filled with noise, studying her father like a character, decoding his shifts in tone, learning when to step forward and when to sit still. By the age of 5, Zelda had already stepped into her father's world, cast as his daughter in Search of Dr. Seuss, where she played alongside him not for fame, but for the thrill of creation. The set was a stage for legacy. It was a playground that early exposure didn't push Zelda into child stardom. Instead, it planted a seed, one that would take years to grow, but would eventually bloom into a career marked by voice work, indie film, and later directing. In her youth, Zelda was curious but cautious. She watched as her father moved through roles like water, slipping between voices and emotions with a speed that both dazzled and unsettled. To grow up with a man whose face belonged to the world, but whose quietest moments belonged only to her, was both a gift and a puzzle. Holidays weren't calendar-bound. They were scattered, stolen between film shoots. Traditions came and went, but one ritual stayed. Cooking in the absence of structure, the kitchen became their clock. Tuesday dinners, midweek meals, scrambled eggs with side conversations that meant more than gifts ever could. Neither Robin nor the boys were known for their culinary skill, but they showed up. They burned toast together. They laughed, that was the point. Not the food. But the rhythm of return Zelda came of age, as the internet was just beginning to blur the line between public and private. Social media didn't explode until her late teens. But the fame her last name carried meant that even early appearances in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and The Legend of Korra drew disproportionate attention. Unlike Zach, who chose the business route before finding his passion in mental health advocacy, Zelda stepped directly into creative work, but always on her own terms. She was never trying to chase her father's fame. She was trying to escape its gravitational pull long enough to define her own voice. Her work as a voice actress, screenwriter, and eventually director revealed a quiet defiance, the determination not to be Robin's daughter on Orsum, but Zelda Williams, a creator who chose darker corners, stranger characters, and complex themes over mainstream simplicity. When Robin died in 2014, Zelda was 24, old enough to understand the layers of what he was going through, but young enough to still believe she might have helped change the ending. The grief was surgical clean in its finality, but messy in everything it touched after. For a time, she withdrew on anniversaries. She'd step away from social media entirely, acknowledging in her absence the intensity of public mourning. Everyone thought they knew her father. Everyone had their version of who Robin Williams was, but only she knew the man who couldn't sleep, who worried too much, who carried others' pain because it distracted him from his own. Her grief wasn't something to share, it was something to protect. But over time, that protection became purpose. Zelda didn't capitalize on his death. She didn't write a memoir or tour his memory. Instead, she worked quietly, steadily, in the background. She wrote scripts, she directed shorts, and eventually she got behind the camera to make her feature debut, Lisa Frankenstein, a genre-bending zombie comedy that, true to form, defied expectation. It wasn't sentimental, it wasn't awards bait. It was uniquely hers, funny, offbeat, deeply stylized, and threaded with the kind of humor that winks at pain without being consumed by it. That was Zelda's voice, sharp, odd, compassionate, and behind every frame was the rhythm she inherited from Robin. Not his tone, but his timing. In interviews, she spoke sparingly about her father, but when she did, it was with clarity. She didn't pretend their relationship was perfect. She acknowledged the complexity, the gaps in time, the stretches where he was more legend than parent, but she also spoke of his softness, of how he tried, of how he never made her feel small, even when the world wanted to make her invisible. And when she became an aunt to Zach's children, McLaurin and Zola, she leaned into the role with a tenderness that mirrored the best parts of her father. She showed up for birthday parties, shared little stories, brought her quiet presence to loud rooms. She understood now more than ever that family isn't about perfection. It's about returning over and over again. Zelda had once said she didn't want to be the next big thing. She meant it. She didn't need to be big. She needed to be real, and in the decades since Robin's passing, she built a life not on tribute, but on transformation. She made art, she made peace. And in doing so, she carried her father's legacy into a new light, not as a shadow, but as a guidepost. With Zach building systems of healing and Zelda crafting new stories, the Williams children were redefining what it meant to inherit greatness. And one more piece remained. Cody, the youngest, the quietest, the one who grew up watching it all and chose, against all expectations, to live almost entirely off-screen. His chapter would be the calmest but no less powerful. And his choice to honor his father, not with fame, but with presence, would turn out to be the most intimate tribute of all. If Zach had carried the responsibility of being first, and Zelda had wrestled with the weight of recognition, then Cody Allen Williams quietly slipped between the two, a son born into a family already steeped in brilliance. but one who never felt the need to perform it. He arrived in 1991 during a stretch of Robin's life that could only be described as unstoppable. Hook, Aladdin, Mrs. Doubtfire. It was a period of back-to-back cultural milestones, with Robin juggling characters, countries, and premieres. But at home, Cody brought a stillness Robin hadn't realized he needed. He was Robin's youngest child, and the last to be raised during the height of his fame, a son who watched his father navigate both the highest accolades and the heaviest silences. Unlike his siblings, Cody chose early on not to chase the spotlight. There were no red carpets, no childhood acting credits. He grew up in the background, present, engaged, but uninterested in public life. That wasn't detachment, that was intention. From a young age, Cody seemed to understand that his father's fame wasn't a path. It was a variable, one that he didn't have to factor into his identity if he didn't want to. His childhood, much like his siblings, was built around adaptation. Robin's schedule was ever-changing, and Cody learned to measure time not by seasons, but by stretches when his dad was home. What bonded them wasn't performance. It was proximity. Cody loved music, loved technology, loved creating without the need for attention. He was the kind of kid who could disappear into projects, who didn't speak unless he had something meaningful to say. That quiet focus followed him into adulthood. While Zach found his place in advocacy and Zelda in storytelling, Cody carved out something different: privacy. Not because he was hiding, but because that's where he felt whole. He studied film, but not as a means to be seen. He worked behind the camera, learned the gears, the systems, the parts of storytelling that didn't require applause. When people spoke about him, it was with words like kind, centered, gentle. He wasn't absent, just grounded. And then, on July 21st, 2019, on what would have been Robin's 68th birthday, Cody got married. The ceremony was quiet, intimate, and rich with symbolism. He and his bride, Maria Flores, exchanged vows at the same home where Cody had spent much of his childhood, a house filled with memories, both brilliant and bruised. There were no celebrity magazine spreads, no paparazzi-lined entrances, but the moment was layered with tribute. Guests were asked to hold yellow roses, a subtle nod to those who were no longer with them. Maria sang "Never Enough," a song full of longing and gratitude, and they lit a 3-wick candle in honor of the family members they had lost. The wedding didn't need to be a spectacle. It was a gesture, a way of saying, "Has still with us, just in a different form." Even in adulthood, Cody rarely made public appearances. His name would surface occasionally, a mention in a family post, a birthday wish, but he never used it to open doors. His work stayed behind the scenes. His voice was shared mostly through others, but his presence, especially within the family, was unmistakable. He was the one who remembered small details, the one who knew how to fix things without asking, the one who brought steadiness when others brought storms. In the years following Robin's death, it was Cody who helped organize private tributes, who held space for both siblings in ways words couldn't always express. And when Zach's children were born first, McLaurin, then Zola, Cody stepped easily into the role of uncle. He didn't overwhelm the room, he simply showed up, quietly, consistently, like a song you only notice once the room is quiet enough to hear it. The family continued to evolve in the decade after Robin's passing. They didn't splinter, they softened. Holidays weren't performative. They were sacred. Time together mattered more than public legacy. The older the children grew, the more they realized they didn't have to defend their father's name. His work had already done that. What needed care was his memory, not the celebrity version, but the deeply human one. The dad who burned pancakes, who made dumb jokes, who called from film sets just to say hi, Cody, with his quiet spirit, often became the bridge between reflection and renewal. And though he never spoke publicly the way Zach did, or directed films like Zelda, his contribution to the Williams legacy was just as powerful. He kept the heartbeat steady. 10 years after Robin's death, the family marked the anniversary not with a press event, but with private words and shared silence. Zach posted a photo from Mork and Mindy. Zelda stepped offline, protecting her space. And Cody, as always, stood just outside the frame, reminding them all that presence doesn't always need to be loud to be felt. His choice to remain private was never about withdrawal. It was about devotion. He chose love over legacy, presence over performance. And in doing so, he honored the parts of Robin that most people never got to see. So what happened to Robin Williams' three kids? They grieved, they broke, they rebuilt. One became a mental health advocate, one became a filmmaker, one became the quiet keeper of rhythm. They carried their father's name with both pride and complexity, never pretending the story was simple, but always protecting what mattered. In a world that remembers Robin for the laughter, his children remember him for the pauses, for the Tuesday dinners, for the burned toast, for the moments in between characters. When he wasn't acting, wasn't entertaining, just being. Their lives aren't defined by his absence. They're guided by what he left behind. If you found this breakdown powerful and want more deep dives into the hidden lives of Hollywood's forgotten children, subscribe to our channel. Your support brings these invisible stories to light. Thanks for listening.